I honestly don't understand myself sometimes. Why am I fascinated with watching powerful people fall, powerful men fall? Why have I spent hours listening to detectives describe murder scenes in forensic detail? Why do I know way too much about serial killers I have never met? At one point, I genuinely wondered if there was something wrong with me. Because turns out, probably not. Nothing's wrong with me. Because if you've ever binged watching Making a Murderer, listening to Serial, The Staircase, or Don't F with Cats, you're in pretty good company. We're the same. Nothing's wrong with us. Today, we're getting into one of the biggest genres in entertainment, true crime. Welcome to Why It Resonates. I'm Lem Zakharia, or Lem Zakharia, and this show explores why certain ideas, personalities, and genres create worldwide ripple effects through the lens of psychology, storytelling, and marketing. Now, to give you a sense of scale, Ryan Murphy signed a deal with Netflix back in 2018 worth somewhere between $250 to $300 million to produce a slate of shows for that platform. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, was one of them, if you've heard of that. And it ended up being the one that actually justified that price tag. Within its first month, it had passed 700 million hours of viewing, making it Netflix's second most watched English language series ever, behind only Stranger Things. Making a Murderer helped define the streaming documentary era. Serial basically invented the true crime podcast as we know it, and Google searches for true crime have climbed dramatically over the past decade. People cannot get enough of it. So why? Why do millions of otherwise kind and pathetic people spend their evenings inside murder investigations? And why is the audience overwhelmingly women? This is what I actually wanted to dig into. Let's set the scene. True crime isn't actually very new, even though it feels like it's a very modern obsession. It's not. Back in the 1500s, in the 1600s in Britain, printers were already selling cheap pamphlets called broadsides, which were packed with gruesome crime reports and trial outcomes. Then came the penny dreadfuls, if you've heard of them, crime and horror stories sold for literally a penny back in the 19th century, and it was aimed at working class readers who couldn't get enough of them either. So people have always been drawn to extraordinary crimes. What changed was actually the formats. Pamphlet gave ways to books, and one of the pioneering works was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which is a nonfiction novel that's worth reading, apparently, based on the research that I've done. So that's probably my next read. From books, it moved into television, and by the late 1980s, shows like Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted were actually bringing in real investigations into people's living rooms. And 48 Hours formatted itself around crime just that same year. And what made that era different was that audiences weren't just watching. They were actually participating. People rang in tips, they helped solve cases, and that's where that armchair detective era came from. Through the noughties, cable channels like Court TV and Investigation Discovery went 24/7 on crime programming, and long-running shows like Dateline shifted heavily into true crime territory. That is that period that normalized true crime, or crime really, as routine entertainment and built the audience that would later on move straight into podcasts and streaming. Then the late 2010s brought in the real boom that we're seeing now with Serial, The Jinx, and Making a Murderer, turning real crime into prestige content. Before I move on, I do want to acknowledge something as a producer myself. Not all true crime is actually made ethically. Some producers, genuinely seek truth. They want to center victims. They want to work closely with families. But others do sensationalize someone's worst day just for clicks and profit. There's a whole episode in that distinction alone. But that's not what we're on to today. Back into focus, Lem. So what's the impact? True crime is not just about entertainment, actually. It changes how people see themselves and the world around them, because the genre actually fixates on rare, extreme cases rather than just everyday crime patterns. And heavy consumption can make things like abductions or serial killing feel really much more common than what they statistically are. For some viewers, this kind of changes trust and their relationship with trust in institutions like police and courts. For others, it does the absolute opposite. It sharpens their appetite for accountability because investigations are now being picked apart by millions of people in real time for those public cases. For the families, the impact is actually, themselves living inside these stories. The impact is much more heavier. It's much more complicated. Imagine your worst day becoming entertainment for strangers, or people debating your loved one's death on Reddit 20 years later. Many families describe this genre as deeply intrusive. And they have to actually relive that loss every time a new documentary comes out or a podcast season is covering it. But that same public attention can also cut through in other ways. Sustained coverage has led to new evidence, fresh witnesses, and cases getting reopened. One of the clearest Australian examples is The Teacher's Pet, which brought renewed pressure to Lynette Dawson's disappearance and helped drive real momentum in a case that sat cold for decades, even though she still hasn't been found. So, true crime does carry weight in both these directions, in the good and the bad. The same attention that can re-traumatize a family is the attention that can also crack a case wide open. So why did it resonate? So why? Why are we drawn into this all? Why the bloodshed, the assassinations, the worst thing one person can ever even conceive of? Here's what I landed on after actually going through that research, is true crime resonates because it takes fear that people can't control in real life, and then it turns it into something that you can manage, that you can study, that you can even solve. So start with the most basic version of that. Psychologists describe true crime as that roller coaster fear in just like that controlled environment. Your brain experiences the threat while your body knows that you are safe. You're on a couch, got a bowl of chips you're cracking at. You get that emotion, but without the actual danger, which is the simplest way that uncontrollable fear becomes something manageable. Then there's the element of curiosity. This is the part that actually hooks me the most. As someone who studies psychology, I'm less interested in the crime itself than I'm understanding, how does somebody get there? How does somebody get to that spot?
I tell you what, though, I'm absolutely obsessed with true crime documentaries.
Are you really?
I mean, when I was pregnant, 24 hours in police custody, or like the most basic true crime documentary, was my craving. That's all I wanted to watch.
Why do you think that is? Is it like a macabre fascination?
There's probably a part of all of us that could potentially do really bad things.
Sure.
Not that bad, hopefully,
Sure.
but who knows? Who knows? And maybe we like to live vicariously through these bad people.
Insane, some of these things that I watch. And what creates a person capable of that? Were there early signs in their childhood? Could it have been stopped beforehand? That's still the same fear, but it's just turning into something workable, and it's reframed as a question that you can actually chase down. The mystery formats adds another layer on top, right? So every interview, every clue, every contradiction gives your brain this puzzle to solve alongside the investigator. So basically, you become the detective in your own way, and that is control dressed up as entertainment. Then there's the justice of it all, which might be one of the biggest feelings you can get when you're watching something and justice is finally served. Life is messy. Bad people often seem to win while good people suffer without any resolution. We see it in our news. True crime offers something that real life doesn't, which is a verdict, an ending, at least the pursuit of an answer, if anything. And that satisfaction is really the same mechanism again. It's just applied to unfairness of the world instead of just like that single crime. Now, why women specifically? Why are women obsessed with true crime? Because this is the question I wanted to answer in this episode.
I have a theory that, especially as a woman, it's like, I want to know all the types of evil out there so that I can kind of not protect myself, but like, I'm aware.
But does that not make you more scared when you watch them? Because
Of course
it does
it does.
me. I'm like in bed and I'm like, every sound I think, well, obviously he's here now.
Women consistently consume more true crime than men, which on the surface seems odd, given that women are also disproportionately more likely to be victims of violence. But the research suggests that women aren't drawn to the violence itself so much as the survival information that's sitting underneath it. Studies show that women prefer stories that explain how an offender operated, how a victim escaped, what warning signs got missed. It functions almost like an informal risk education. Knowledge as protection. That's the fear made controllable in the most literal form because it's information that you can actually use. It's practical. It's also why so many of the biggest true crime narratives center violence against women. Women see themselves, their sisters, their daughters, their friends inside those stories. And that's the emotional pull. And that runs really, really deep. The ones that I connect with personally are the stories that spend real time on who the victim was, or not just like how they died. Her life, her relationships, her family. That's the true crime that I really like to watch and resonate with. There's also a clarity to true crime that doesn't really exist in a lot of places in our world. Victims get remembered, diligent investigators, they keep persisting, perpetrators are held accountable, and for women who are, they regularly experience or witness injustices that never really resolve cleanly, this black and white ending is so reassuring in a way that real life isn't really. But the same mechanism that makes this feel safe for most people can also misfire for others. This is worth mentioning. Graphic depictions of assault and homicide can trigger flashbacks, anxiety, and hypervigilance in people with trauma histories, especially when the story is mirroring something that they've actually lived through. So for some women with lived experience of violence, true crime is validating, educational, but for others, it's that re-traumatization that keeps happening. So the same genre can have the opposite effect, depending entirely on how the story is told and what someone is carrying into that story. So the fear doesn't really turn controllable for everyone, is what I'm saying. For some reason, it just stays as fear. So if you've ever found yourself 3 episodes deep into the staircase at midnight, wondering why you're this invested, you are not a weird person. You're doing something humans have been doing for centuries, which is trying to understand danger, trying to understand justice, trying to understand each other as humans. And for me, true crime has never really been about just the murder itself. It's about the psychology underneath it. It's about how people behave under extraordinary circumstances. Maybe that's why it resonates as well to many of us. And if you've been watching this episode today on YouTube or Spotify, please let me know what you think of it. We've changed up the format a little bit. Elizabeth, our producer, has put a lot of work into making these episodes feel like more immersive for you visually, as well like as the audio part of it. Till then, from me, Lem, have a beautiful day or night wherever you are. You're not weird if you watch true crime.